from the Broken Wheel Cycle. Volume 2. The Wheel Turns. The Problem with Lin. A Warhammer 40,000 story. Everything about the room was hard. The walls were bare concrete, poured without seam or ornament. The corners were sharp, precise and deliberate. Overhead sodium lights flickered, burning their outline into Lin's vision if she looked at them for more than a moment. The cold crept up through the floor and into her bones. There was no sound, not even the hum of machinery. The silence pressed in until she could hear her own breathing, the pulse in her ears. Inquisitor Halen entered the room precisely 37 minutes after Lin's internment. The interrogation manual recommended 30. In Halen's experience, the additional 7 minutes were highly beneficial. Lin? Halen paused as he sat opposite the prisoner, thumbing his data slate. Lin Turell. An Ahavi name, if I am not mistaken. Halen did not wait for an answer, but continued speaking. Lin Turell, you are accused of transgressing the Codex Mechanicus, Halen continued, his voice even, almost clinical, of employing unsanctioned and heretical mathematics. Your actions resulted in the loss of 31 vessels, 3,720 souls. He lifted his eyes from the data slate and fixed them on Lin. How do you respond to these charges? Lin remained silent. Her nails bit into her palms as she focused on breathing, on drawing air into lungs that felt increasingly unwilling to cooperate. Halen tapped the slate. The sound cut cleanly through the silence. Do you understand the gravity of your actions? He asked. Do you comprehend what the Inquisition may decide? Another pause. Lin said nothing. Very well, Halen murmured, leaning back in his chair. Then we will begin at the beginning. Lin was 12 when the Arbites came. She'd been at school. By the time she got home, her grandmother's quarters were sealed. A servitor stood guard at the door, unblinking. The Enclave elders said it was natural causes, heart failure, age. But Lin had seen her grandmother 3 days before, healthy and strong. Their last conversation was still vivid in her memory. They sat in the small back room of her grandmother's quarters, door closed, voices low. Papers covered the worn and scuffed table, hand-drawn symbols, elegant and precise. The Ahavi were mathematicians, her grandmother said quietly. Before the Imperium, before the Mechanicus. We understood things they've chosen to forget. Why did they forget? Lin asked. Because some truths are dangerous. Some mathematics asks questions the Mechanicus doesn't want answered. Like what? Her grandmother smiled, sad and knowing. Like whether the machine spirits are really spirits, or just very complex mathematics. She pushed a paper toward Lin. Don't show this to anyone. Don't tell your teachers. Promise me. Lin promised. The symbols were beautiful. They made sense in ways the approved mathematics didn't. Lin learned them quickly, hungrily. Her grandmother called it a gift. Lin thought it was just obvious. The patterns were right there. Anyone could see them, but not everyone could. That was the problem. The Arbites had been asking questions for weeks, investigating preservation of prescribed knowledge. Someone had informed, someone always informed. Her grandmother hadn't recanted, hadn't forgotten, hadn't destroyed the papers. 3 days later she was dead. 6 years later, Lin sat in the testing hall on Ahavi Station, taking the entrance examination for the Schola Mathematica on Vendros Prime. The proctor had given her 2 hours. She had finished in 17 minutes. The problem was elegant enough. Orbital mechanics, multi-body gravitational intersections, precision requirements for fleet navigation. The kind of mathematics that separated competent calculators from exceptional ones. Lin had solved it using the approved Imperial methods. Base 10 arithmetic, sanctioned algorithms, everything orthodox and correct. The answer sat on her slate, 0.78342915556. She stared at it for a moment. Then, on a separate sheet she'd brought, she reworked the problem using the old mathematics, the real mathematics, the symbols her grandmother had taught her. The patterns emerged immediately, beautiful, precise. The Imperial method had been crude, functional but blunt, like cutting with an axe instead of a scalpel. The old way revealed structure the approved mathematics couldn't see. Her stylus moved quickly, almost without thought. The symbols flowed. And there, the same answer, but extended, not 0.78342915556, but 0.78342915563849227. 10 additional decimal places, 10 additional degrees of precision. For orbital navigation, that difference was merely whether one arrived leeward or starboard. But at system scale, the difference could mean whether one arrived or not at all. She sat back, looking at both answers. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. The Imperium doesn't forgive what it doesn't understand. Survival is what matters. Lin looked at the superior answer for a long moment. Then, carefully, she folded the paper with the old mathematics, tucked it into her pocket and submitted the Imperial solution. The proctor reviewed her work, eyebrows rising slightly. 17 minutes and... correct. Impressive, Candidate Tyrrell. Thank you, sir. Most candidates don't finish at all. You'll do well at Vendros. Lin nodded, said nothing. The scholarship letter arrived 3 weeks later. Fleet Admiral Constance didn't look up when Lin entered his office. He was thumbing through one of the many data slates piled on his polished gnarlwood desk. Dressed in a freshly pressed uniform, with closely cropped grey hair and a short beard, he looked every inch his rank. "Lin Tyrrell," he said, still not looking up. "Word is you are some kind of genius." Lin could not tell if it was a compliment or an accusation. "I wouldn't say that, sir." Constance put the data slate aside and cast an appraising gaze over Lin. Top of class at Vendros. Computational specialist certification in 3 years instead of 5. Magos Verikan says you're the best student he's seen in 2 decades. He leaned back into his chair, fingers steepled. That's his assessment. What's yours? Lin shifted her weight slightly, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. I did well at the Skolum, sir. Orbital mechanics, navigational mathematics, fleet logistics. I completed the standard curriculum. Standard. Constance's lip curled slightly. Nothing extraordinary. I worked efficiently, sir. Efficiently. He picked up the data slate and studied it for a moment before continuing. Do you have any experience with actual fleet navigation? Combat manoeuvres? Warp translation calculations under non-standard conditions? No, sir? Any practical experience at all? Or just Sholam exercises? Just Skolam work, sir. Constance stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the window overlooking the orbital dockyards. Hundreds of ships hung in the void. Cruisers, frigates, transports. A fleet waiting. Then I have no idea. he said quietly. Why Verican sent you. Silence. Lin stood very still, waiting. Constance turned back to her. This fleet, he pointed at the massed ships outside, is supposed to deploy in 6 weeks. Cross through the Kolos Reach and support the campaigns at Distant Dawn. He walked back to his desk, pulled up a star chart on the hololith projector. The projection showed a vast region of space marked in angry red. This, he gestured at the red zone, is the Kolos Reach, a warp anomaly within which the Astronomicon is completely obscured. Warp translations through that region fail 95% of the time. Yet it is the only way to reach Distant Dawn, at least without traversing the entire sector. My team has been working on this for months. Navigators, computational specialists, tech adepts, all clever, all experienced, all failed. He looked at her. So, unless you have some brilliant insight they have missed, some genius solution that justifies Verican's recommendation, I'm wasting both our time. Lin looked at the projection, the anomaly, the proposed routes, the failed calculations displayed on the dashboards. She could see the problem immediately. They were trying to find a route through the anomaly, the way one might try to map a geographic feature. The math was solid, if somewhat inelegant, but the core problem was they'd tried to apply constants to a system that was continually changing. Only a model that adapted dynamically, that responded to the anomaly as it changed, could offer any assurance of successful translation. May I? She asked, gesturing toward the data slates. Constance waved a hand dismissively. By all means. Lin picked up the nearest slate, scanned the calculations, then another, then a third. Constance watched her, arms crossed. Well, it's all just mathematics, Lin said quietly. What? Navigation, fleet manoeuvres, warp translation. It's all mathematics. Different applications, but the principles are the same. She looked up at him. You're treating this like a navigation problem, but it's actually a pattern recognition problem. Constance's eyes narrowed. Explain. Lin set down the slate she was holding. The Astronomicon is a fixed reference point. When it's obscured, navigators lose their orientation. Your team has been trying to compensate by creating stellar reference points, but it won't work. To triangulate a position, you need 3 points. 2 for direction, your stellar reference points, and the third is your current location. But, while in the anomaly, we cannot reliably determine where that current location is. She pulled up the star chart again, studying the anomaly region. You're treating the anomaly like a static obstacle, something to avoid or overcome. She traced the red zone with her stylus. But it's not random. It has structure, patterns. She turned back to Constance. If you could map those patterns systematically, measure the distortions, track how they shift, you could build a predictive model. This gives you your current location, meaning you can then use the stellar reference points your team have created as a substitute for the Astronomicon. Constance leaned forward. The anomaly becomes the map. Exactly. Lin set down the stylus. You're not fighting it, you're reading it. Can you build this model? Lin paused a moment. Yes, she said. Constance studied her face, looking for doubt, hesitation, found none. Then you start tomorrow. Report to Computational Section 7 at 0600. Captain Joss will brief you on operational parameters. He pulled up a personnel form, began filling it in. You have 3 months. After that, the fleet deploys whether you're ready or not. Understood, sir. Constance finished the form, sealed it, set it aside. 847 ships, Tyrell. 12 million souls. That's what's riding on your model. He looked up at her. Don't fail. I won't, sir. He gestured dismissal. 6 weeks later, Lin sat alone in computational section 7, surrounded by data slates and projection screens, showing her model in various states of incompletion. The framework was sound. The pattern recognition algorithms were elegant. The predictive matrices tracked the anomaly distortions exactly as she'd proposed to Constance. But it wasn't working. The anomaly shifted in ways that were too complex, too subtle for orthodox mathematical models to predict. The approved algorithms could track known patterns, but they couldn't anticipate new ones, couldn't learn from variance, couldn't refine themselves based on observation. The model was static. The anomaly was dynamic. She'd been working on this problem for 3 days straight. No sleep. Barely any food. Just calculation after calculation, trying to make orthodox mathematics do something they fundamentally couldn't. She knew the solution. The old mathematics. Her grandmother's teachings. Algorithms that adapted. That learned from data, that created their own pathways. That refined their own parameters based on outcomes. Code that evolved. She pulled out a blank sheet. Started writing the symbols from memory, the forbidden patterns. Within a few hours she had it. An adaptive algorithm, beautiful, elegant. It would work, perfect. Also, completely heretical. The kind of self-modifying code that was explicitly forbidden by the Mechanicus. For Lin there was no magic. Just algorithms given a little more autonomy. Functions could call other functions, lambda operations built dynamically, logic inherited, shared, and overridden as needed. But to the Mechanicus this would seem dangerously close to artificial intelligence, machine learning in the most literal sense. If anyone discovered it, she'd be executed. And even if she could hide the heresy, the Imperium would never accept a solution built on forbidden mathematics. She stared at the symbols for a long time. Then she began transcribing them into orthodox notation, hiding the true structure beneath layers of approved mathematical language, making it look like standard predictive algorithms. Complex, yes, but within doctrinal tolerances. It took 2 more weeks. When she was done, the model looked orthodox, passed cursory Mechanicus review, but underneath it was alive, adaptive, learning. She ran the simulations. The model worked perfectly. It predicted the anomaly patterns with extraordinary accuracy. Every test showed the same result, near certainty of successful passage. There was just one problem. No one would believe it. She'd built a model that predicted success without any empirical data. No ships had been sent through. No actual measurements taken. Just mathematical projections based on theoretical distortion patterns. Constance would never authorize a fleet deployment based on theory alone. No admiral would. Not when 12 million lives were at stake. She needed proof. Real proof. Data from actual passages through the anomaly, which meant ships would have to go through. Test vessels. Gathering real measurements to feed and validate the model. And because the early model wasn't perfect yet, because it needed data to refine itself, to learn, most of those ships would be lost. The mathematics were clear. Brutal, but clear. To save 847 ships, she'd have to sacrifice dozens. To prove the model worked, people would have to die. Constance sat behind his desk, arms crossed, face set in stone. Lin stood across from him, data slates spread between them, showing her projections, her model, her request. "Sir, the simulations show—" "I don't care what the simulations show." Constance's voice was flat, hard. "You're asking me to send ships, crewed ships with souls aboard, into a lethal anomaly so you can gather data for a theoretical model. It's not theoretical, sir. The mathematics are sound. The mathematics are untested." He leaned forward. "You're 3 months out of the Skolum. You've never commanded anything, never seen combat, never lost a ship under your command." He gestured at the data slates. "And now you're telling me to sacrifice vessels. How many did you say? 2 dozen? 3? So you can prove your model works. So the fleet can cross safely, sir. If your model works, if your patterns are real, if your predictions are accurate." Constance shook his head. "That's too many ifs to justify the deaths you're proposing. Sir, without empirical data, there's no way to validate. Then find another way." His voice was final. "I won't authorize test passages, not on theory, not from you, not from anyone." Lin felt something cold in her chest. "The fleet deploys in 6 weeks. If we don't validate the model, then we wait. Delay the deployment. Find another route. Request navigators from other sectors." Constance sat down, already turning back to other work. "What I will not do is send my people to die so you can test your calculations." "Sir, dismissed, Tyrell." She stood there for a moment, wanting to argue. Knowing it was pointless, she left. Adjutant General Gundar took lunch in Lewin Park every 7th day. The small enclave sat directly opposite fleet headquarters. Trees and wooded paths, populated by simu parrots and gene-bred butterflies. When questioned, Gundar claimed the change of scenery kept his perspective fresh. The truth was simpler. He missed the forests and grasslands of his childhood. This artificial patch of nature offered respite from the plastic halls and incessant intrigues of fleet headquarters. Tipped off by one of the tech adepts, Lin found Gundar eating a modest lunch beneath the weeping oaks by the stream. He was eating something simple: bread, cheese, fruit, no attendants, no guards. Just an old soldier sitting under trees by artificial water, feeding simu parrots his crumbs. He was older than she'd expected. Grey hair, weathered face, tired eyes that suggested he'd seen too much and decided to keep looking anyway. Lin approached cautiously. "Sir." She stopped a respectful distance away. He looked up from his meal. "I apologize for the breach in protocol. But you're here anyway." Gundar studied her. "Because you believe you're right and Admiral Constance is wrong." Lin was startled. "How did you—" Gundar chuckled. "You don't reach my age or rank without ears in high places and low. So, computational specialist Tyrell, tell me why you think Constance is wrong." "It's not that I think Constance is wrong, it's that the mathematics are right. What Constance thinks doesn't—" Lin stopped abruptly. Her face turned crimson. Gundar raised an eyebrow. "You might want to think carefully about what you're about to say. Constance is a highly decorated and respected admiral of the fleet." "Sorry, sir." Lin's voice was quieter now. "I didn't mean to—" "What I meant was, Constance doesn't disagree with the mathematics. He's just unwilling to accept the possible loss of resources. I think you'll find those resources have names and families and friends. Gundar set down his bread, looked at her directly. Lin flushed again. Yes, sir, sorry. The loss of men. He isn't willing to risk them on what he considers an unproven model. But the mathematics are sound. The model is correct. We just need to gather more data to complete it. At the cost of how many ships? Lin had run the calculations. Over and over. 30 to 40, sir. Possibly fewer if the early data is particularly informative. Possibly more if the anomaly is more complex than projected. And you're asking me to authorize these deaths. I'm asking you to authorize the testing that will save 847 ships. Gundar was quiet for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. Lin looked at him, confused. Gundar snapped his fingers. The data, Lin. I presume you brought your data and weren't relying solely on your abundant wit and charm. Lin blushed and handed him the data slate she'd brought. Gundar pulled up her model and began reading. Actually reading, not skimming, not dismissing. His eyes tracked across the calculations with the careful attention of someone who understood what he was looking at. This is elegant work, he said finally. Unconventional, but elegant. Thank you, sir. Admiral Constance says it's too theoretical, too risky, that you're too inexperienced to make this kind of judgment. He's not wrong about my experience, sir, but the mathematics don't care about my age. No. Gundar set down the slate. They don't. He was quiet again, thinking. I met a space marine once, he said finally. Salamander. He told me something I've never forgotten. He said the Imperium endures because of hands we never thought to see. People doing what needs to be done even when no one notices. He looked at Lin. Sir. Gundar brushed her question away with a wave of his hand. And if you're wrong, if the model fails, if those ships die for nothing, then I was wrong, sir, and I'll accept whatever consequences come. Gundar studied her for a long time, as will the crews of those 40 ships. Then he pulled up an authorization form. 35 ships, not 40. Volunteer crews only, people who understand the risk. Full data collection on every passage, and if the model doesn't show improvement after the first dozen, we stop. Understood? Lin felt her heart hammering. Yes, sir. This authorization supersedes Admiral Constance's objection, but understand, if this fails, if these people die without achieving anything, you won't be the only one facing consequences. I'll answer for this too. He finished the form, sealed it, handed it to her. Don't make me regret this, Churel. The first ship was a light transport, originating from Bassport Minos, the Meridian's Grace. Small crew, 15 souls, volunteers, all of them. Captain Joss had been very clear about that. They knew the risks. Lin stood at the monitoring station, watching the Meridian's Grace maneuver into position at the anomaly's edge. The red zone stretched before it like a wound in space. Beside her, Tech Adept Kaya checked the telemetry one final time. All recording systems operational. Data transmission active. Captain Joss stood at the communications console, his face carefully neutral. Grace, this is Control. You are cleared for passage. Emperor protects. The response came back, crackling slightly through the Vox. A woman's voice. Young, trying to sound confident. Control, this is Grace. Captain Bayliss. Beginning passage. For the Emperor and the fleet. Lin's hands gripped the railing. Her calculations said this ship had approximately a 12% chance of successful transit. The model needed data, needed to see what actually happened inside the anomaly. but it wasn't ready yet. 12%. Or to put it another way, 88% chance they wouldn't return. The Meridian's grace engaged its warp drives. For a moment, nothing. Then the ship folded. Space bent around it, pulled it forward, and it slipped into the angry red of the anomaly. Kaya watched his instruments. Telemetry holding. Data transmission active. We're receiving... The screens flickered. Grace, report status, Joss said, his voice steady, static. Grace, do you copy? More static. Then fragments of something. Not words, just noise. Wrong noise. The kind of sound that shouldn't exist in real space. Kaya's instruments began showing impossible readings. Spatial distortions that violated every principle of known physics. Time dilation factors that made no sense. Data stream degrading, Kaya said quietly. We're losing. The telemetry went silent. Complete silence. Joss tried again. Meridian's grace, this is control. Do you copy? Nothing. They waited. 2 minutes. 5. 10. The ship didn't emerge from the other side of the anomaly. Mark the vessel as lost, Joss said finally. His voice was flat, careful. Record all data, prepare for analysis. He looked at Lin. How much did we learn? Lin forced herself to look at the data screens. The telemetry they'd captured before the ship died. The distortion patterns. The partial measurements. Enough, she said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Distant. Enough to refine the model, to improve the predictions for the next passage. The next passage. Kaya was staring at her. You mean the next ship? Yes. Another crew, another 15 people. Yes. Kaya's jaw tightened. And you think they volunteered, Lin said. They knew the risk. Knowing the risk and dying are different things. Lin turned back to the data screens. Started analysing. Converting the telemetry into refinements for her model. Behind her, Kaya stood very still. 15 people just died, he said quietly. And you're already thinking about the next test. Lin's hands paused on the controls, shaking. What else can I do? She said, not turning around. If I don't continue, then they died for nothing. She resumed working, blinking away tears that Kaya could not see. Behind her, Kaya said nothing. But he didn't leave either. Ship 2, the Dauntless Herald, lost. Ship 3, the Emperor's Mercy, lost. Ship 4, the Resolve, lost. Each one refined the model. Each passage added data, distortion patterns, translation vectors, warp current mappings. The mathematics were working. The predictions were getting better. But still the model was hungry. Lin stopped learning the ship names after the 7th loss. It was easier that way. Easier to think of them as data points. Test runs. Variables in an equation, Kaya noticed. Ship 9 is the Vigilant Dawn, he said one morning, watching her prepare the analysis protocols. The captain's name is Renault. He has a daughter. She's 6. Lin didn't look up from her work. Are the telemetry arrays calibrated? Did you hear what I said? Yes. And the telemetry arrays need to be calibrated, Tech Adept. We need clean data. Kaya was quiet for a moment. Does that mean nothing to you? He said finally. That you, are about to send a ship to their deaths. That in 30 minutes Renault's daughter may be an orphan. That mothers will lose sons. Fathers, daughters, children, parents. Lin wouldn't look at him. I'm doing what needs to be done. No, you're doing what you decided needs to be done. There's a difference. Lin finally looked at him. Her eyes were ringed with dark circles. She'd been sleeping 2 hours a night, sometimes less. 97 people have died, Kaya continued louder now, in 9 ships. And you barely react anymore, you just calculate. Because reacting won't save the fleet. The mathematics will. The mathematics. Kaya's voice was bitter. Is that what you call it? What else would I call it? I call it bodies, Lin. I call it people who aren't coming home. I call it murder. Lin swung savagely to face Kaya. Then leave, she hissed. They volunteered to be here, as did you, as did I, as did every fucking person in this room. She stopped abruptly, startled by her own outburst. Then turned back to her console, drawing into herself once more. The Vigilant Dawn is cleared for passage. Inform Captain Joss. Kaya stood there for a moment longer. Then he walked to the communications console. The Vigilant Dawn was lost 17 minutes later. By ship 15, the model's predictions had improved to 31% success rate. Ship 16 survived. The crew's transmission as they emerged from the anomaly on the far side was shaky, disbelieving, grateful. They'd made it. First successful passage. The transmission was met with a ragged cheer from the operations room. Staff shaking hands, thumping shoulders, smiling, laughing. That evening they gathered for drinks, celebrating the first success. All except Lin. Lin stayed behind, updating the model with the new data. Now ship 17 would have a 34% chance of success. It was lost. Ship 18, 36% chance, lost. Ship 19, 38% chance, survived. The curve was climbing, the model was learning. Kaya stopped speaking to her unless absolutely necessary. Captain Joss watched her with an expression she couldn't read. Concern, maybe, or horror. Magos Verikan reviewed her work periodically, nodded approval, and studiously mentioned nothing of the cost. Ship 23 was different. Lin was running the pre-passage analysis when Kaya appeared at her station. He set down a data slate. "Read it," he said. "I'm busy." "Read it." Lin picked up the slate. It was a personnel file. Ship 23's crew manifest. Full biographical data. Captain Saros Ven. Age 47. 30 years service. Wife on Cadia. 2 sons in the Imperial Guard. Navigator Illa Kresk, age 34. Orphaned at 12. Raised by the Navi's nobility. Engaged to be married. Engineer Dorian Halst, age 29. Father was a tech priest. Wanted to follow in his footsteps, but failed the trials. Served in fleet engineering instead. 15 names, 15 lives, families, histories, hopes. Lin read through all of them. Then she set down the slate. Ship 23 has a 54% chance of successful passage, she said quietly. Better than even odds. The model is working. These are people, Lin. I know. Do you? Lin looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw the exhaustion, the weight he'd been carrying, watching her send ship after ship to die. Every one of them volunteered, she said. Every one of them knew what they were signing up for. They're doing this so the fleet, 847 ships, 12 million souls, can cross safely. And that makes it acceptable. It makes it necessary. It makes their sacrifice mean something. Kaya shook his head. You sound like the Imperium. Sacrificing the few for the many. Turning people into numbers. How does it feel? Erasing those lives like lines in your equations. Maybe if it were you losing a loved one for the Imperium, you'd feel different. Lin said nothing for a while. When she spoke, it was very slowly and deliberately. The Imperium would have sent the entire fleet through blind and lost everything, Lin said. "I'm trying to save them." "By killing volunteers first?" "Yes." They stared at each other. "Ship 23 is cleared for passage," Lin said finally. "Inform Captain Joss." Kaya picked up the data slate with the personnel files and threw it on the desk. "You should keep this," he said. "Remember their names. Remember what this cost. Remember how to be human." He left. Lin sat alone at her station, surrounded by data screens showing probabilities and distortion patterns and survival curves. She didn't keep the personnel file. She couldn't afford to. Ship 23 launched an hour later. 54% chance of success. It survived. Lin recorded the data, updated the model, logged the success. Later that night, in the solitude of her quarters, it was a long time before Lin could stop crying. Ships 24 through 30. Success rate climbing. 58%, 63%, 67%, 71%, 75%, 79%, 82%, 7 ships, 6 survived, 1 lost. The model was starting to work. The adaptive algorithms were doing exactly what Lin had designed them to do, learning from each passage, refining predictions, approaching certainty. Ship 31 had an 87% chance of successful passage. Lin stood at the observation deck, watching it maneuver into position. This would be the last test. After this, the model would be validated, ready for the fleet. This time, they were sending a heavy troop transporter, the Obdurant Sun, carrying over 10,000 souls. The fleet had run out of smaller vessels and was growing impatient. Kaya stood at his station, silent. They hadn't spoken in days except for operational necessities. Captain Joss gave the clearance. "Proceed with passage. Emperor protects." "For the Emperor," came the response through the Vox, crackling with static. The ship engaged its drives, folded into the anomaly. Telemetry held. Data streamed back, clean, clear, perfect readings. Then silence. The whole universe seemed to pause, holding its breath far too long. And then the ship emerged on the far side. 0 complications. Textbook passage. "Successful transit confirmed," Joss said. "All crew accounted for. No casualties." The Obdurant Sun had made it through. 10,000 souls delivered safely. Lin felt her knees go weak. She gripped the railing. It was done. 31 ships sent, 27 lost, 4 survived, 3,720 souls dead. But the model worked. 87% success rate on the final test. Good enough, better than good enough. The fleet could cross. Lin returned to her quarters that night and sat on her bunk in the dark. She'd been holding it back, the weight of it. 3,720 dead. But that wasn't the real number. Every death rippled outward. Friends, family, lovers, parents, children. How many thousands more would grieve? How many lives had she shattered to save 12 million? Lin didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after. The fleet deployment was scheduled for 3 days later. Lin presented the final model to Admiral Constans, Captain Joss, Magos Verikan, and a room full of senior officers. The presentation was technical, precise. She showed the testing data, the success rate progression, the final validation results. Constans listened without expression. When she finished, he asked only one question. "How many did we lose during testing?" 3,720 souls. "And you're confident the model works?" "Yes, sir. 87% success rate on final validation." With the full fleet crossing, we should see near total success. The model predicts 0 to 3 losses out of 847 ships. Constance looked at the data for a long time. Adjutant General Gundar authorized this testing over my objection, he said finally. He was right to do so. The results speak for themselves. Pause. The fleet will deploy as scheduled. Your model will be implemented. Well done, computational specialist Tyrell. Lin felt nothing. Thank you, sir. She left the briefing room. Behind her she heard Constance speaking quietly to Joss. The words were barely audible, but she caught them. Nearly 4,000 dead to prove a theory. I hope she can live with that. Lin kept walking. The fleet crossed the Kolos Reach 2 days later. Lin monitored from the observation station. 847 ships, moving in formation following the model's predicted safe routes through the anomaly. The telemetry came back clean. Ship after ship emerging successfully on the far side. 0 losses, 0 complications. 12 million souls delivered safely to the Distant Dawn campaigns. The model had worked perfectly. Kaya stood at his station, watching the data stream. When the last ship emerged safely, he turned to Lin. "You did it," he said quietly. Lin nodded. "Was it worth it?" he asked. She looked at him, tired, haunted, said nothing. Kaya returned to his instruments. Fleet Admiral Constance sat in his office reading the after-action reports. 0 losses. 847 ships had crossed the Kolos Reach successfully. The model had worked perfectly. Lin Tyrell was being called brilliant, visionary, the mathematician who'd solved the impossible problem. And Constance looked like the cautious fool who'd tried to stop her. Gundar had overruled him, made him look weak, made his judgment look flawed, all because he'd refused to gamble lives on an untested theory, which turned out to be correct. He should have been relieved, grateful. The fleet had made it through. The campaign was proceeding. Lives had been saved. Instead, he felt only cold anger. He pulled up surveillance authorizations. His rank allowed for operational security reviews, monitoring of key personnel for irregularities. There were rumours from the Sholem of eccentric practices, grumblings from colleagues about untestable mathematics that just seemed to work, even when they shouldn't. It would have been impolitic to investigate while Operation Distant Dawn was still in progress. But now, with the fleet's part done, he would have his satisfaction. Lin Tyrell's computational work would be reviewed, thoroughly, properly. If there was anything irregular about her methods, anything at all, it would be found. He filed the paperwork. 3 months later, tech adept Roberts submitted his report. Anomalies in Tyrell's code structure, patterns that suggested adaptation, self-modification, machine learning, forbidden techniques. Constance read the report twice. He paused. For the merest of moments he questioned his pettiness, the consequences of his actions, but it soon passed. He was Fleet Admiral Constance. No one made a fool of him. He forwarded it to the Inquisition. "Some would call you a hero." Haylen's voice was measured, almost conversational. The Inquisitor scrolled through his data slate without looking at Lin. 12 million souls delivered safely to Distant Dawn. 7 worlds reclaimed from the arch-enemy. Supply lines secured, reinforcements deployed, all because of your model. He looked up. The Lord General himself submitted a commendation. Recommended you for the Macarian Cross. Did you know that? Lin said nothing. Others would call you a monster. Halen tapped the slate. A new file appeared on the projected screen between them. Names, hundreds of them. 3,720 souls. I have their names, Tyrell, all of them. Captain Saros Ven, Navigator Illa Kresk, Engineer Dorian Hulst. He paused. Let the names hang in the air. Shall I continue? He scrolled through the list, name after name. Lives reduced to text. Lives that Lin had turned into variables in an equation. They volunteered, yes, but you sent them. You calculated their deaths. You knew, mathematically, that most wouldn't return. He leaned forward. One might argue that's not strategy, Tyrell. That's murder dressed in mathematics. Pause. But ultimately, both perspectives are irrelevant. Halen set down the slate. Because we are not here to debate your intentions. We are not here to weigh lives saved against lives lost. We are here because of the methods you employed. He pulled up a new file. Let me read you some testimony from your colleagues. Tech Adept Clarice, engineering specialist assigned to support operations. Halen read from the slate. The computational specialist's algorithms showed unusual adaptability. When questioned, she explained this as just predictive refinement. I believed her at the time. Upon later review, Halen paused. Upon later review, I recognized the code suggested self-modification, adaptive learning, parameters that change themselves based on input data without human intervention. Halen looked up. Another file. Captain Joss, Operational Commander. I am not a computational specialist. I cannot speak to the technical details of Tyrell's model. What I can confirm is that her predictions became more accurate with each test, if you ask me unnaturally so, as if the model was thinking, learning. But as I said, I work in operations. I'm not a computational specialist. Another. Magos Verikan Mechanicus Oversight. Halen's voice took on a slight edge here. Lin's work was reviewed at each stage. All documentation appeared orthodox. However, I now recognize that certain algorithm structures were deliberately obfuscated, hidden beneath layers of approved notation. When stripped to their core logic, they reveal... He paused, watching her face for reaction. Would you like me to finish that sentence, Tyrell? What they revealed? Lin said nothing. Machine learning. Self-modifying code. Algorithms that adapt and predict without human guidance. Do you know what we call that in the Imperium? Silence. Abominable intelligence. Halen set down the slate. But here's what interests me most. He pulled up one final file. Tech Adept Roberts. The specialist who performed the final code audit. The one who discovered the true structure of your algorithms. He read, I was assigned to perform a security review of computational specialist Tyrell's work. Analysis revealed extensive use of adaptive algorithms, self-modifying parameters, and predictive structures that violate Mechanicus doctrine. The code learns from input data and refines itself without human intervention. This constitutes tech heresy under the Codex Mechanicus, subsection 47, paragraph 12. Recommend immediate inquisitorial review. Halen looked at Lin. He was very thorough, very precise, almost eager to provide evidence. He scrolled further. Would you like to know who requested this audit? Who specifically directed Roberts to examine your code for irregularities? Lin felt cold. Fleet Admiral Constance. 3 months after the fleet's successful crossing. After you'd been celebrated, commended, called brilliant. Halen smiled slightly. He couldn't challenge your results. The fleet made it through, the campaign succeeded, but he could question your methods. And when Roberts found what he was looking for, what Constance suspected was there, the Admiral forwarded it directly to the Inquisition. He leaned back. Revenge, perhaps, professional spite, or genuine concern for orthodoxy. We may never know, and to tell the truth, I don't care. But the evidence is clear. Pause. Though I should note, not everyone cooperated so readily. Another file. Tech Adept Kaya. Halen's voice was dry now, amused. When asked to provide specific technical details of the computational specialist's code structure, Tech Adept Kaya stated he did not have the expertise to comment. When pressed, he maintained this position. When reminded that failure to cooperate with an inquisitorial investigation constitutes obstruction, he replied. Halen looked up, one eyebrow raised. I saw someone try to save 12 million people. That's all I saw. A ghost of something passed across Halen's face. Not quite amusement, not quite respect. He was detained for 3 days. Eventually he provided the technical testimony we required. But he tried to protect you, Tyrell. Even knowing what you'd done, even understanding the heresy involved, he set down the slate. Loyalty is admirable, even when it's misplaced. Lin's throat went tight. Poor Kaya, always trying to do the right thing. Now? Halen's voice pulled her back. Let's discuss your defense. Lin's voice was quiet when it came, trembling but certain. It's just mathematics, complex mathematics, nothing more. If you show a child a combustion engine, they'll think it's magic. Fire appears, the machine moves, magic. But as adults we understand. It's chemistry, physics, predictable, just the natural laws of motion and thermodynamics. She met Halen's eyes. My algorithm isn't artificial intelligence. It's an adaptive, predictive matrix. It doesn't think. It calculates. It doesn't learn like a human learns. It refines patterns based on input variance. The Mechanicus calls this heresy because they don't understand the mathematics. That doesn't make it heresy. It makes them... She stopped. Too late. Halen leaned forward. It makes them what, Tyrell? Finish the thought. Silence. Ignorant, superstitious, primitive. His voice was soft, dangerous. You were about to say the Mechanicus doesn't understand. That the Imperium, the institution that has preserved humanity for 10,000 years, is a child staring at a machine it cannot comprehend. He tapped his data slate. So, tell me, computational specialist, are you calling the Imperium of man a child? Lin said nothing. There was nothing she could say. The truth was, she had been calling them children. The Mechanicus, with their rituals and superstitions, their prayers to machine spirits that were just complex code. And now, those children would kill what they couldn't understand. Halen smiled. It wasn't pleasant. Your silence is answer enough. He stood, pressed his thumb to the data slate. A seal appeared, official, final. Lin Tyrell, by the authority vested in me by the holy ordos of the Inquisition, I find you guilty of tech heresy, specifically the creation and implementation of abominable intelligence, the use of unsanctioned and prescribed mathematical techniques, the willful transgression of the Codex Mechanicus. The seal pulsed red. Sentence is death, by firing squad, to be carried out at the first opportunity. He looked at her. His eyes were empty. May the Emperor have mercy on your soul. He didn't sound like he believed that would happen. Rough hands grabbed Lin's arms. She tried to stand on her own, but her legs wouldn't cooperate, so they hauled her up roughly, half dragging, half supporting her. Her wrists were cuffed behind her back, and a heavy damp hood dropped over her head. Darkness. The fabric smelled of iron, old sweat, and something else. Fear. Other prisoners' fear. Now hers. "Wait!" Her voice came out strangled. Quiet!" They dragged her forward. She stumbled, her ankle wrenching painfully. They didn't slow down. Corridors, turns. More bumps, more bruises, elbows, knees, wrists carelessly bashed against walls, doors, handles, railings. She lost track. The hood disoriented her. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't orient herself, couldn't think. She was going to die. The thought hit her suddenly, completely, not abstract, not theoretical. So real it was, as if her entire life up to this point had been lived in a haze, a partial dream. And now she had been abruptly woken from that dream. The reality of her impending death, so hard and immense, it felt like a soft face being smashed against a jagged concrete floor. In hours, minutes, maybe less, she would be standing against a wall, blindfolded. A firing squad would raise their weapons. Someone would give an order, and she would stop existing. Would there be pain? Would it be so quick she would not know the moment had passed? Or maybe there would be one final moment of grief and regret, so vast and intense it would last an eternity. Lin sobbed messily. "Please." Her voice broke. "Please, I said quiet." They shoved her into what felt like a vehicle. Metal floor. Cold. She fell forward, couldn't catch herself with her hands cuffed. Her shoulder hit the floor hard. The door slammed shut. Darkness. Silence. She tried to steady her breathing. Couldn't. Every breath drew wet fabric into her mouth, drowning slowly on damp cloth. Hyperventilating now. The hood made it worse. Not enough air. Too much air. She couldn't tell. Her bladder released. Warmth spread down her legs. Humiliation flooded through her, mixing with terror. She was pissing herself, lying in her own urine, about to die. She started sobbing, not quiet crying, ugly, choking sobs. Her whole body shaking, snot mixing with her tears and acrid breath. The vehicle lurched into motion. She lay on the cold metal floor, hood over her head, hands cuffed, lying in her own piss, sobbing. No heroic last thoughts, no defiant final words. Just animal terror, and the knowledge that in moments, or minutes, or hours, she couldn't tell any more, she would be dead. The vehicle rumbled on. Time stopped meaning anything. Minutes, hours? She couldn't tell. The hood, the darkness, the fear, it all blurred together. The vehicle shuddered, not movement, something else. Vibrations through the hull. Heavy. Rhythmic. What was that? Not a car. Engines? A shuttle? Where were they taking her? She'd assumed the execution chamber, firing range, something local, quick. But if they were on a ship? A sudden new terror washed over her, freezing and numbing. Oh my God, they're going to space me. Lin's febrile mind pictured with absolute terrified clarity being pushed out of an airlock into the cold, dark void. The moisture on her tongue, eyes, nose boiling away. The oxygen being stripped from her blood as she fought to breathe. Skin swelling and splitting as fingers and ears froze and snapped off. Lin's stomach lurched. She retched. Watery bile filled her hood, burning her eyes, her nose. She couldn't escape it. trapped with the stench and sting. The vibrations continued, steady, powerful. Then the vehicle stopped. There was a loud bang, and all vibrations ceased. Footsteps. The door opened. Hands grabbed her again, pulled her upright. She stumbled, legs numb from lying on the cold metal. They walked her forward, pushed her down onto something, a bench, a chair, she couldn't tell. The hood came off. Light. Painful after darkness. She blinked, trying to see. A guard stood in front of her. His expression was carefully neutral, professional. He looked at her, took in the tear and vomit-streaked face, the smell, and his nose wrinkled slightly. He reached behind her. The cuffs clicked open. Lin's arms fell forward. She couldn't move them at first. Circulation returning, painful. The guard tossed a bundle of clothes at her feet. "Change!" His voice was flat, bored. This was just a job. Lin stared at him. "I don't... Where... Change," he repeated. "You've got 5 minutes." He turned his back. A small courtesy, the only one she'd get. Lin's hands shook as she stripped off the urine-soaked clothes. Pulled on the new ones. Simple. Grey. Menial workers' coveralls. Not execution clothes. When she finished, the guard turned back, looked her over, nodded. He handed her a piece of parchment, folded. Sealed with wax she didn't recognize. He didn't wait for questions. Just walked out. The door sealed behind him. Lin stood alone in the small chamber holding the parchment. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. The handwriting was precise and careful. "Lin, the only comfort I can offer you is erasure instead of death. Exile to Peripheral Station 12. Menial work and surveillance for the rest of your life, but at least a life. This is the only quality of mercy the Imperium can afford that I am able to offer. A salamander once told me the Imperium endures because of hands we never thought to see. People doing what needs to be done despite the costs. You were one of those hands, Lin. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better." Lin sat down slowly, still holding the note. 12 million saved. 4,000 dead. Sentenced to die. Saved at the last moment, exiled to slow erasure. All of it felt equally distant, equally unreal. The transport shuddered beneath her, void-capable engines, taking her away from everything she'd known, everything she'd been, towards some peripheral station where she'd scrub floors or sort components or do whatever meaningless work they'd assigned her. She tucked the note into her pocket. Her hand brushed something else. Another folded paper, one she'd carried for years. She pulled it out, unfolded it. The exam answer. 10 decimal places of precision. 0.7834291556384927. The truth she'd hidden to survive. Lin sat in the transport bay of a ship carrying her toward exile, holding 2 pieces of paper. The ship's engines rumbled, carrying her toward Peripheral Station 12, toward menial work and surveillance and slow death by irrelevance. She refolded both papers carefully, placed them together in her pocket. Epilogue. The summons came 6 months after Lin Turel's exile. Adjutant General Gundar sat in his office, smaller now, reassigned after the distant Dawn deployment, and read the formal complaint filed by Inquisitor Halen. The language was precise and devastating. Adjutant General Gundar did willfully interfere with inquisitorial proceedings by commuting the lawful execution of convicted tech heretic Lin Turel. This action demonstrates a pattern of valuing operational efficiency over doctrinal orthodoxy, and raises serious questions about the Adjutant General's commitment to Imperial truth. The complaint went on, page after page, other incidents dredged up from years of service, decisions questioned, orders scrutinized, a career of difficult choices, now reframed as evidence of unreliability. Gundar set down the data slate. He'd known this was coming, had known it the moment he signed Lin's commutation order. His aide, Captain Dewar, appeared in his doorway. "How bad?" Gundar asked. "Bad. Haylen's formally requested a full audit of your command decisions for the past decade. He's got support from 3 other Inquisitors. They're calling it a review of operational judgment under doctrinal scrutiny, which means they're building a case." "Yes, sir." Gundar was quiet for a moment. "My family, not yet. But if you fight this, if you refuse cooperation or challenge the review, they'll expand the investigation. Associates, family members, anyone who might have been influenced by your irregularities." Gundar closed his eyes. He'd commanded fleets, made decisions that affected millions, spent 30 years in service to the Imperium, trying to do what was right within a system that often made rightness difficult. And now, because he'd shown mercy to a mathematician who'd saved 12 million lives, his family would be investigated, his wife questioned, his sons' careers scrutinized for signs of inherited unreliability, unless he gave them what they wanted. "What are my options?" Dewar's voice was careful. "You could fight, request tribunal, demand formal charges. But that takes time, and during the investigation your family would be vulnerable." "Yes, sir." "Or resign, accept blame, take full responsibility for the Churel commutation and any other questioned decisions, request voluntary exile, and my family would be cleared. No investigation, no scrutiny. The matter ends with you." Gundar opened his eyes, looked at the data slate. 30 years of service reduced to a list of supposed irregularities. "How long do I have?" "They want an answer by week's end." 3 days. Gundar stood, walked to the window, looked out at the orbital dockyards where ships came and went, carrying out missions he'd planned, orders he'd given, decisions he'd made. He thought of the salamander, the words he'd never forgotten. He'd tried to be those hands, to do what needed doing even when it wasn't approved. Even when it was irregular, Lin Tyrell had been those hands too. Had solved an impossible problem, had saved 12 million lives. They'd destroyed her for it. Now they'd destroy him. But his family, his wife, his sons, they didn't deserve to pay for his choices. "Prepare the resignation documents," Gundar said quietly. "I'll sign them tomorrow." "Sir, that's an order, Captain." Dewar stood there for a moment, then saluted, left. Gundar remained at the window, watching the ships. Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow. A life of tired repetition stretched before her. Each identical shift marching its petty, pointless pace from one day to the next. Every morning the same. Rising early. Walking the drab journey to the recycling compound on an empty stomach. A slow procession to the last syllable of her exile, however many years that might be. All her yesterdays, a Harvey, Vendros, the fleet, were nothing now. Just fleeting moments on the journey to this place. Peripheral Station 12. Subbase 7. Component sorting. Menial labour. Dusty, meaningless work. Her final destination. Lin sorted components. Size, material composition, wear condition. The precision that had saved 12 million, now applied to organising garbage. Efficient, methodical, signifying nothing. The bins were arranged by material type. Ferrous alloys, non-ferrous alloys, composite materials, ceramics, plastics. Within each bin, sorted by size. Within each size category, arranged by wear condition. It didn't matter. No one checked. No one cared. But Lin couldn't stop herself from doing it correctly. Her hands moved automatically. Pick up component. Visual assessment. Ferrous alloy, medium size, moderate wear. Place in appropriate bin. Next component. None of it mattered. Her mind still worked, still saw patterns, still solved problems that no one had asked her to solve. But there was no one to tell, and if she did, it would surely raise the ire of the Arbites. She'd been doing this for 2 years. 730 shifts. Roughly 400,000 components sorted. The Arbites visited every week, same day, same time. A reminder that she was watched, that her exile was conditional, that any irregularity, any sign of the brilliance that had damned her, would result in immediate execution. She'd learned to be carefully mediocre, to work efficiently but not exceptionally, to hide the fact that she was still, underneath the grey coveralls and the menial labour, the same person who'd built an adaptive algorithm that saved a fleet. The door to Sub-Base 7 opened. Lin didn't look up, kept sorting. Footsteps, not the Arbites, wrong rhythm, too hesitant. "Excuse me, I'm looking for—" The voice stopped. Lin glanced up. A woman, 30s, naval logistics uniform, junior officer, rank insignia. Her face was familiar in the way distant memories are familiar. Someone Lin had seen before, somewhere in another life. The woman was staring at her. Recognition flickered across her face. Shock. Then something else. Fear? Embarrassment? Pity? Lin remembered suddenly. Computational Section 7. The woman had been an assistant logistics coordinator, had delivered supply reports, had occasionally asked Lin questions about resource allocation algorithms. Her name was Vara, Vessa, something like that. They'd barely spoken beyond professional necessity, but the woman knew who Lin was, what she'd been. The woman's expression went carefully blank. "Never mind," she said. "Wrong bay." She turned, walked out. The door sealed behind her. Lin returned to sorting components. She hadn't expected anything different, but something in her chest hurt anyway. Lin picked up another component. Ferrous alloy, small, heavy wear. Placed it in the appropriate bin. The next shift would be the same, and the one after that, and the one after that. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. The garden was small, 12 metres by 8, recycled soil, carefully managed light and temperature. The vegetables grew despite, or perhaps because of, the artificial conditions. Gundar knelt beside a row of tubers, checking for root rot. Hands that once commanded fleets and destroyed worlds now moved gently through the soil, brushing roots clean and inspecting them. Grey hair. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. But the garden grew. That was something. He'd written to his sons that morning. The messages took months to reach them. Sometimes they wrote back, sometimes they didn't. He understood. Associating with a disgraced former adjutant general, even if he was their father, carried risks. He didn't blame them. The door to the garden chamber opened. The estate manager, a pinch-faced woman who treated the exiles with bureaucratic disdain, appeared in the doorway. "Correspondence," she said. dropping a sealed envelope on the small table near the door. She left without waiting for acknowledgement. Gundar stood slowly. His knees protested. He walked to the table, picked up the envelope, his eldest son's handwriting. He opened it carefully, read. Gundar read the letter twice. Then, brushing moisture from his eyes, he folded it carefully, placed it with the others he'd received, not many, but enough. He returned to the garden, knelt again beside the tubers. His hands moved through the soil, patient, methodical. Hands that had commanded millions, now tended vegetables,